Hey guys, let's go ahead and get started on this crisscross ear warmer that I did on the AliExpress or your 22 pin machine. So this is going to be a 2-color project and 180 rows total. So for this project, I started with the turquoise, and as you can see, I cast on the very first row. And if you'll notice, I go ahead and reset my counter after the cast on. If I'm not using waste yarn, I generally like to cast on, then reset, because that first row actually becomes a drawstring and is no longer a knit row. So on this one, I'm gonna go 45 rows before I change colors. Again, it's 180 rows total, so each of your ends will be 45 and your center section will be 90. So once I get to that 45, I go ahead and change my colors and tie that off. And then I'm going to do 90 additional rows of the alternating color. This will take your counter to 135 if you are someone who doesn't reset your counter in between. Once I get to the 135, I'm ready to change my color back to the turquoise. And I will do an additional 45 rows of this, which will take my counter to the full 180. As you can see on this project, I twisted up quite a bit underneath. I usually have my Addy clamped to the table and on the edge so that the tube falls out a lot nicer. But for this tutorial, so that I could center it with the camera, I had it scooted over into the middle of the table, so I fought with it just a bit. I'm ready to cast off now though, and so I will cast off using, again, no waste yarn. And as you notice, I kind of use my fingers into the pins so that whenever I'm pulling it off, I don't pull it off too far and I don't lose any of my work that way. So once I get that done, I pull out my work, kind of stretch it out a bit, and now I'm ready to just finish those ends off. And I do finish those ends off flat, again, without using waste yarn. And I'll show you the method that I use in order to do that. So whenever I pull my drawstring and get it about where I like it, I'm going to start going in and picking up the stitches on every other side and just alternating back and forth all the way across this piece. Once I do that and get that all completed, I'll be ready to tie off that end with a simple knot. And then I'll be ready to move to the other side, and I'll do the exact same method that I did on that side. Again, weaving it back and forth. Get that little flat panel at the end and then knot off the edges. I'm going to go ahead and grab some stitch markers for this part, and this is where you'll see the 2 colors work well, especially for your first time doing this, just so it gives you a good visual of where to line up and where to start. You can definitely do one solid color. You'll just need to count down 45 rows from each side and join that for your center section. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and put that stitch marker in. Make sure that those edges are lined up. And so here you see I've got that right in the center, and I put it to the left side of the center because I'm going to start crocheting on the right side. On the right side here, you see that I'm counting up 26 rows, and you're going to put another stitch marker in the 27th slot. That way it'll give you room to go all the way up 26, and I do that for both sides and then just join those together. Now I'm ready to crochet. I like to use the solid color. It doesn't really matter which color you use for this. I just have always chosen the solid for the ones that I've done. So for this, you're going to start with a pretty long tail. I would recommend 3 to 4 yards. I think I did 5 on this one, and I cut off quite a bit of yarn. So 3 to 4 yards of yarn is plenty for this to get started. I like doing it that way so that it just eliminates an extra knot in my work. So as you see, right past that stitch marker, I insert my crochet hook through both sides. And I'm now going to use my yarn and thread it through, and I'm going to start crocheting. And sorry, I came off camera just a little bit, pulling that first loop through. but I'm just going to crochet this edge all along. I chose to do it this way instead of the mattress stitch, just so that it would allow to have a little bit more stretch in my work whenever I was finished. And as you see, I'm going to go into the very next knit stitches on each side. I'm going to pull all the way through, crochet that through, pull all the way up until that last loop, and then you're going to single crochet through both of those. Again, you're going to work your way all the way up to that stitch marker. And as you'll see, as we work our way up, it will still allow plenty of stretch. You will have a seam here that stands up just a bit, but it's okay. It lays pretty flat. It still gives a pretty finish, and all of this will be on the inside of your work as well. This is definitely the most lengthy part of the project. Just making sure that you are going stitch per stitch and that everything's lining up correctly. The stitch markers definitely help through this process, keeping all of your work lined up. As many of you guys probably already know, the work can get twisted pretty easily with the tubular machine, so this definitely helps keep everything lined up. I'm going to work my way all the way to that stitch marker, and then whenever I get close, I go ahead and remove the stitch marker whenever I'm ready to go in those last 1 or 2 stitches, just because it makes things a little bit easier. In my opinion, they kind of get there in the way. And whenever I finish this off, I leave my extra work. I don't tie it off yet, and the reason that I don't is because I like to give myself a little bit of room for error, and if I need to go back and change or shift anything, I can. But I definitely leave my loop there so that nothing comes undone, but I can still go back and tie it off. As you see there, I pulled and stretched on it, and it works well. Throughout my project, I kind of do a little check and make sure that everything looks like it's lining up on the front side as well. So I'm ready to complete the other side of the project. And again, you'll notice that I've got my stitch marker in, and that is my first row. I'm going to count all the way down to 26 stitches again, and then put my stitch marker just beyond that, so in the 27th stitch. Now I go ahead and remove that center, and I start crocheting exactly the same way that I did on the first side up to that stitch marker. Going up to 26, I have found, was a good number because it is far enough up that it keeps everything closed off right up until the crisscross. It doesn't let any air in or anything like that, and then keeps your ears covered if you go all the way up to that mark. If you go halfway, it still leaves a little bitty hole there for air to get through on your ears, which is the whole point of the ear warmer. So 26 seemed to be my magic number, but play with it. You may find that a little bit more, a little bit less works best for you. Again, I keep my loop large because right here is where I'm going to just kind of go in, check my work, make sure that everything seems to be folding in fine and going to be laying together nicely. You can see on the back side there, finishes off nicely. And here is where I'm going to crisscross the front, just as kind of my final check to make sure everything's good to go. Once I'm happy with that, I'm ready to flip everything back inside out, and then I will, at this point, go ahead and tie off those edges that I just crocheted, knot those, and then I will take that tail yarn there and just work it back through the tube. Again, this is definitely the most time-consuming part of the project, is just kind of working that together. The rest of it goes pretty quickly. I'm now ready to, while my project's still inside out, ready to finish off these ends and sew them together. This is how I finish off all of my ear warmers, even if I do a crisscross closure or anything like that. This is how I would seam it off. So just make sure that you stay close into that drawstring line that you created whenever you closed off each of the tubes, and everything will flatten out really nicely on that seam. So once you have that done, you're ready to tie that edge off. And again, I just pull in the excess string and trim that off. So at this point you can be done with it, but I prefer to go back and secure that center to that top row. So now that I've got everything lined up, I'm happy with how it looks. Turn it over on its back and make sure everything is good to go. I go ahead and flip that back inside out one more time, and this is the point where I'm going to start securing that back crisscross to the top crisscross. And I'm going to do that by joining it in 4 different spots. And I hope that you can see well enough on here to see exactly what I'm talking about whenever I say how I go through, so that it ends up not showing. But you're going to push that needle up from the back and into the top. Right there, I split my thread a little bit, so I pulled back out just because I wanted as clean as possible, and I don't want to be able to see that turquoise come through. So I'm going to go down into the knit versus across the knit. And whenever you go down, that's going to secure one of the posts that will actually tuck clean. So what I mean by that is the blue will not be showing through the top if you go down through the knit versus across the knit sideways. Once I have that set, I'm going to just go ahead and tie it off and pull the excess through the turquoise tube. I chose to secure it across the seam in 4 different places. You could do more or less, but 4 worked for me really well. Made it feel secure without making really a line all the way across. So I'll go ahead and finish those other 3 up now. And then all that we'll have left to do is add a tag to your headband if you wish. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and definitely you may need to play with the row counts depending on what type of yarn that you're using. I love this yarn from Hobby Lobby, and the 180 row count worked really well for me, as in my regular headbands, if I do a twisted closure, I usually do 93 rows with this yarn. So 180 worked great for me. As I finish this up, all that I have left to do is add my tag, and this project is completed. Don't be afraid to have fun with colors, play around with it, do some different things, and just be creative.